So let's start off with the agenda. The goal of today, we're going to walk through an overview of what Office 365 is, both from a service offering as well as a client user interface. And then we're going to walk into OneDrive for Business and what that brings to the collaboration space. From there, we'll talk about the different products that allow the entire team and organization to collaborate with each other. Then we'll talk about security inside the platform, a little bit about Office 2016, and then we'll walk through a demo and then talk about Q&A. So let's get started. Office 365, in terms of a service offering, you can think of basically taking your standard on-premise service applications, and now they're hosted by Microsoft, and you now interact with them as a subscription service instead of having to maintain the different servers, installing, configuring. You now consume the service itself. And as of today, it consists of Exchange Online, SharePoint Online, Skype for Business, Project Online, and CRM Online. They've also added a new product called Sway. You can think of this as basically an interactive storytelling tool. So that's everything on the service offering side. If we look at it from the client side, we've got what's called Office 365 ProPlus. Instead of the traditional install and basically way of purchasing Office, where you had to purchase licenses for each device that you were installing Office on, Microsoft has moved more towards the subscription where each individual user is licensed, and then they're allowed to now install Office on up to 5 different devices. I say devices because it can be your laptop, a desktop, an iOS device, an Android device, your phones. It doesn't really matter. You have up to 5 different devices to now install Office on so that you're working across the same user experience across each one of those devices as you're interacting with your content. Let's jump into OneDrive for Business. You can think of OneDrive for Business as Microsoft's enterprise cloud storage for individuals. I say individuals because when you're talking about teams working together, departments, lines of business, that content would normally be stored in SharePoint sites, and you would set up your typical information architecture around the different structure that you want there. When we're talking about content that doesn't belong necessarily to those teams or those departments, and it's more about the individual and what they're working on, that content would go into OneDrive for Business. Now, OneDrive for Business, one of the use cases we've really seen adopted so far is typically you would have a network share, probably a home drive that everybody was using. Those home drives are now being migrated more towards cloud storage, namely OneDrive for Business. The nice thing, once you've got your content in your individual users' content in OneDrive for Business, they now have the ability to interact with that content anywhere, anytime, across any device. So they're not siloed to being on the network for working on that content. They could be at home on their laptop. They could be on the road with their tablets, all interacting and even potentially synchronizing that content offline to the devices so that they can work even if they don't have internet connections. More and more with OneDrive for Business, we're seeing Microsoft tying the different Office products to interacting with OneDrive for Business. Namely, right here we see OWA interacting with attachments, being able to both save and send attachments, or what looks like attachments, as we'll see later on in the demo. But really the content is either being uploaded automatically to OneDrive for Business for you, or it's being presented to the recipients as a OneDrive for Business attachment. So now that you have content up in OneDrive for Business, IT pros are potentially concerned about being able to synchronize that content offline to different devices that they don't have control over. So Microsoft recently introduced the concept of being able to block non-domain joined PCs from actually synchronizing offline. So it's fine if everybody has their work laptop and they're synchronizing when they're on the road, they can interact with the content offline. But if you don't want them to be able to go to, let's say, their home PC and start downloading content, automatically synchronizing all the content offline, you can now block it so that only machines that are joined to your domain would be allowed to do that synchronization process and work offline. So that was individual storage for the enterprise and interacting with content. Now let's start talking about some of the different components that would enable teams, departments, and overall the organizations to start connecting with each other and collaborating across the Office 365 suite. So So we're starting off with the About Me page. For anyone who's used SharePoint in the past, you may be familiar with the concept of the My Site and synchronizing your user profile information into your My Site and displaying that information. This is sort of the evolution of that product. So now in Office 365, you really don't have your My Site anymore. What you have is this About Me page, and they've really streamlined the overall look and feel of it. You're still able to bring in information if you're synchronizing with Active Directory. The end user can still populate some information in there if they wanted to around potentially past projects, maybe skills that they have, or even clients that they've worked on. So this now becomes a page. We see a lot of use cases around this is now basically almost a resume search database, or even just a skill search, knowledge management around, inside the organization, you often end up getting those emails to the Everyone group asking us a pretty basic question. Instead of that being flying around, you can now start looking at it in terms of just doing a search across Office 365. Individual users and with the proper skill sets could start coming up. Microsoft is still working on this in terms of the overall authoring experience for the end user so that they have better capabilities of how it looks and feels. But right now, it is pretty clean, streamlined, and gives a good sense of what the user has to offer the organization. Moving on from there, we talk about enterprise social. And a few years back, Microsoft purchased Yammer, and they're in the process of integrating it more and more into Office 365. With each new release, they basically are tying it tighter and tighter to the platform. And I guess one of the things that I didn't mention before when I talked about the service offerings of Office 365, mainly SharePoint, Exchange Online, OneDrive for Business, Skype, is those online products will always receive the latest features much sooner than your on-premise, if the on-premise ever receives some of those features. So Yammer is a good example of this is always hosted by Microsoft. And what you'll end up seeing is content that is often stored inside of SharePoint or even inside of OneDrive for Business. You start having meaningful discussions around that content in Yammer. So every time people hear enterprise social, they start to cringe around the social aspect of it. And it's really not about uploading your family videos and photos into Yammer. This is about you have content inside the organization and you want to have meaningful discussions around it. It could be a latest report that's out, or it could just be around project documents. But instead of sending emails to individuals for feedback on it, or sending attachments around, trying to get information on it, and having those discussions siloed inside of inboxes, it's now memorialized inside of Yammer, where now later on, someone else with the proper permissions does a search and they bring back relevant content around that discussion. The next piece we're moving on to is what's called Office 365 groups. This is a new feature that Microsoft brought into Office 365 pretty recently. And the concept here is really enabling teams to start spinning up collaboration spaces for them to work quickly and not having to go through a process of spinning up different sites and different areas for collaborating. This gives teams the ability to create an area where they have files that they can interact with, a calendar they can interact with, a conversation area where they can have those discussions, and then also a OneNote notebook where they can share team notes. Now, this is early on in terms of the Office 365 groups, but it is being added to pretty steadily in terms of its functionality and where Microsoft's trying to bring it. The next piece we're going to talk about is Delve. So right now, individuals are very comfortable with navigating to the content that they want to get to. Everyone's familiar with the file system and traversing the folder structure, and quite often we see that when organizations move from the file share into a document management system, something like SharePoint, or even as simple as OneDrive for Business, they often end up replicating that file system, that file structure inside of the document management system. For better or worse, that's a different discussion, but they end up having a structure where the end user is constantly trying to navigate to the content. As users become more comfortable in Office 365, they start using search so that you'll put in maybe a keyword and get back a handful of meaningful results, as opposed to maybe 5 to 10 clicks of traversing a nested hierarchy of sites and subsites and folders and subfolders. Search will get you to the content much quicker. What Microsoft is now offering is the concept of Delve, where based on your interactions of content across the system, whether it be different documents inside of SharePoint, documents in OneDrive for Business, emails, meetings, Yammer discussions, instant messages. Delve is now going to surface the most relevant content to you directly up to you. Instead of you having to go find the content, it's now presented to you without you having to go search for it. And this is all done with what's called the Office Graph. So in the background, Microsoft has this concept called Office Graph, which is a bunch of APIs for the most part, just collecting data. It's basically using the concept of signals, and signals are really this feature where every time you open a document, you save a document, you share a document, you reply to an instant message, you send a message, or you attend a meeting, you post social content, all of that is being captured. And what's happening in the background is Office Graph is now ranking all the content that you interact with, and Delve is using that information to now surface it to you in a meaningful way. So again, you don't have to go search for content or navigate to content. You go directly to Delve, and there's a pretty high likelihood that what you're going to work on for that day in terms of documents will be right there on your landing page. Moving on, we talk about Skype for Business. This has been renamed. It was previously Link. It's now called Skype for Business. It did adopt very much the look and feel of the consumer product Skype. What you'll end up seeing now is with Skype for Business, you'll really start interacting real time with instant messaging rather than sending those asynchronous messages for email and sitting there and waiting to see if someone answers your question. You reach out to the person who you really need the information from, send them a quick message, they respond right away, and then from there you can move on without having to keep checking your email. That's pretty much how you'll start using Skype for Business. Once you're comfortable with the instant messaging features of it, you'll then move on to start doing Skype calls. You may have the team working on content, and you'll have video calls across the entire team. Then you can actually start doing desktop sharing, where not only are you doing video conferencing with the team, but then you'll also potentially have a desktop op where everyone's commenting and working across the same document at the same time. So again, Skype for Business kind of rounds out the overall collaboration space there. The last piece that I want to talk about in terms of an organization and doing collaboration is around a new product that Microsoft recently released for Office 365 called the Office 365 Video Portal. So more and more organizations are starting to create more digital assets. Often those digital assets, they may be videos that you eventually want to publish out on a public video portal such as YouTube, but while you're actually reviewing those videos, you want them to be private to the organization, or they may be videos that you're creating for internal use only around training. All of that is stuff that you really don't want out on the public internet. So Microsoft came up with the concept of the video portal that's tied to Office 365. The nice thing is here, you're starting to upload video into this portal, and in the background, it's actually using a service called Azure Media Services. And what's happening is as soon as it's uploaded into the video portal, Azure Media Services picks it up, and it will do encoding, and it also acts as a streaming media service. So the encoding now gives you the ability to play back your video on any device you need, and all you had to do was upload your original video. Not only is it doing the encoding, but the streaming portion of Azure Media Services is a scalable enterprise-grade solution. Azure Media Streaming Services was actually used by NBC for the 2014 Olympics and streaming all the games. So it will definitely scale to what you're looking for. So now that we've made the leap and you've now agreed you're putting your content up in the cloud, what is Microsoft doing to secure your content? So the first piece is really around encryption. If we're working our way from left to right, we'll start with number one. Data in transit between an end user and Office 365 is always encrypted. So there's no man-in-the-middle attacks. Everything across the wire is actually encrypted. You don't have to worry about that being compromised. If we move over to number two, data in transit between data centers is also encrypted. So Microsoft has quite a large number of Office 365 data centers. Your tenant may be located at one specific data center. If you're traveling and you are hitting one of their other data centers first, you'll hit that data center, and then the data will actually come across their backbone. And between data centers, it's actually encrypted before it's also encrypted before it's presented to you. The third piece of it is data at rest. So as content is actually stored on Microsoft storage devices, it's also being encrypted at that point as well. So sitting there on their drives, it's encrypted. And the last piece is around end-to-end encryption between different users across the system. So if you have two individuals that are interacting with content while working on Office 365, it's also encrypted between those two users. Now, two new features that are coming out to help out with this encryption process is one for data at rest. Basically, Microsoft is going to, in the near future, allow you to bring your own encryption keys so that when they do the encryption, you hold the keys to what's actually able to unencrypt it as well. So now, let's say the government comes to Microsoft and comes and pulls out some of their drives, they're not getting anything because you actually own the keys. So until they come to you for those the keys to do the unencryption, at that point there's really nothing they can do with it. The other thing that they're going to release in the near future is what's called the customer lockbox. So right now, you as a customer would open up a support ticket with Microsoft if you were to have an issue with anything that's running inside of Office 365. The engineer that's going to try and solve the problem of that ticket actually has no access to any of your customer data inside of the Microsoft Data Center. They actually initiate a process of multiple workflows that start the approval process for them to get a small window of temporary access, minimal amount of access to your content to try and solve the issue at hand. What Microsoft's looking to add at the end of that process is before the final approval to grant that temporary access, they want to actually open the workflow up to the customer themselves to give information of the engineer that's actually going to go and touch your data and allow you to have final approval before that engineer can touch that content. And that's called, like I said, customer lockbox. So the next piece is around e-discovery. Now that your content is up in Microsoft's cloud, how do you get access? How do you find content if, let's say, you have pending litigation that you need to pull back necessary information? Because it's in Office 365, you now have the ability across SharePoint, OneDrive for Business, Exchange, and Skype for Business to actually find any data based on the search criteria you provide, and that'll allow you to not only find the information, you could potentially put it on legal hold, and as well, you can also export that content to industry standard structure that can be handed off to potentially outside counsel for either review or a handover to other litigators. The next piece is around data loss prevention and rights management. So rights management has been around for a while in terms of an on-premise product. While many organizations want to implement it, they like the features, it's rather difficult to implement and maintain. It requires a lot of servers, internal access, external access. So most organizations didn't actually implement it. Once you sign up for Office 365, it's now available to you for use inside of your system. So you now have it for any emails that you want to set the permissions for, and you can see here we have the ability to set the email as confidential. It can be confidential view only, and you can set it to do not forward. So all that's available through the out-of-the-box Office 365 Rights Management Service. If you wanted to turn on additional features where you started creating your own permission sets, you can do that if you upgraded it to what's called Azure Rights Management Services. The other part of this in terms of data loss prevention is the ability to notify an end user or even block an end user from sending any email that has sensitive information inside of it. So Microsoft's already defined quite a large number of what they call sensitive content types. These are based on the different countries. So U.S., we have HIPAA, PCI, banking information around routings, ABA numbers, credit card numbers, and there's a laundry list of others that are out there. And basically, you can take those current sensitive information types and you can apply rules and policies of what the end user experience is going to be if that sensitive information is actually located in your, right now, email in terms of this screen. So that was data loss prevention in terms of an email and stopping that sensitive information from leaking outside of your organization. In terms of SharePoint Online and OneDrive for Business, it has data loss prevention capabilities, but as of today, it's very, it's happening in the background. It's more of an e-discovery-like experience. The system will, based on the rules you set up, look for that content that's stored in the system and flag it as sensitive information and notify the proper participants to rectify the actual sensitive information and either take it out of the content or remove the content completely. I say as of today because they're releasing in the near future a closer experience to what we have with Exchange and Outlook, where as content, as sensitive information is being added into the system, the end user would be notified with policy tips, and the content would actually be locked down to just that user so that it couldn't get outside of the organization, and that user would have the ability to either remove that information or delete the document itself. Again, that's coming. It's not here yet, but that is something that is coming soon. The next piece around security is really around your mobile device. So before we said you now have the ability to install Office on up to 5 different devices. So the IT pros out there, I'm sure, are just saying, okay, I've lost complete control. If people are accessing my content off all these devices, what do I do? So as part of Office 365, Microsoft's giving you some built-in capabilities around managing those mobile devices to ensure that you still retain control. The first piece is around conditional access. So basically, this concept is if this device has not registered itself as being managed through Office 365, you're not going to be granted access to the content inside of Office 365. The next piece of it is managing the entire device. So ensuring that certain rules are set up, like requiring a PIN to access the device. You can potentially even set up how complex that PIN is going to be. You can even do other things like turn off screen capture or maybe potentially even block Bluetooth access. So there's some basic things that you can lock down on the device itself before they're allowed to access any of the Office 365 content. And then the last piece of it is around selective wipe and reporting. So you'll get some basic reporting around who's accessing the content and what device they're doing it from. But you'll also have the ability to selectively wipe out any business content that's been downloaded to the device. Now, I say business content because we've always had the ability to just wipe any mobile device out there. That's really not the best case scenario, though. I mean, right now, everyone's merging their work life, so even your business phone, you may have some pictures from a family event, or on another device, you may have some video that's been uploaded to it. What will end up happening is, with this mobile device management solution, when you selectively wipe, you'll make sure you wipe only content that's come from Office 365 and not any of the personal content that's on the device. The last piece around this is, if you want a little bit more control than what's given to you out of the Office 365 built-in components, you can upgrade for a smaller fee to what's called Microsoft Intune. Intune will give you a little bit more around the policies you can set on the devices, but the bigger thing it gives you is actually application management. So when you're installing those Office applications or even other line of business applications to the device, that can now be controlled through Microsoft Intune. So the last piece around Office 365 that I want to touch on is some of the resources you have available to you. I'd say one of the best ones out there is the Office 365 roadmap site. Previously, it was very difficult to know what Microsoft is working on or what releases are coming out and what features they're going to have in them. For Office 365, they've done a much better job. This website will tell you what they're rolling out today and what they're working on, what's in development, and even if something's been canceled. Now, something to keep note of, if something says it's currently rolling out, that doesn't mean it's going to hit your tenant day one. There are thousands and thousands and thousands of tenants, so for them to roll that code out, it will take some time, depending on how big the change is. Could be weeks, could be months before it actually hits. But again, this roadmap gives you a very good sense of what they're working on and where they're going with it. The next thing is the Trust Center. So Microsoft's pretty good about putting in documentation around all of the compliance issues that what they meet and what they're working on right now. They're actually updating that, and they're releasing what's called the Service Trust Portal. This will give you a little more information inside what they actually have in terms of compliance. And then not necessarily an Office 365 thing, but Office 2016 was actually released today. I don't know what everyone on the phone is using, but yes, we are up to Office 2016, and it is out today. So there's some big updates here in terms of, not surprisingly, deeper integration with the cloud. So everything that Microsoft is doing is tying into Office 365 and Azure, so it's no surprise that Office 2016 is really going to let you interact with specifically Office 365 much better. Specifically around working with attachments, file sharing, and even save as and opening from. Another nice feature that they're adding is the real-time co-authoring in Word. So we've had co-authoring since SharePoint 2010, and basically, if you were using the online versions of Office, you had pretty close to real-time interaction. So as you're typing in a Word document or an Excel spreadsheet or a OneNote file, you would see both users, well, up to 10 users would actually see what everyone's working on, what everyone's updating. When it came to the desktop client, it took more of a restrictive approach where it actually locked different portions of either a document or a PowerPoint slide so that you couldn't overwrite someone else's work. With Office 2016, at least for Word so far, they're actually going to give those real-time updates. So if you're working in the rich desktop client as opposed to the online client, as you're working on the document, other people can be working on this document and you'll see what updates are being made. There's also going to be the cloud attachments in Outlook. We saw a little bit of it before in OWA, and I'll demo it a little bit in OWA, but that same experience will now come to Outlook. We'll also have the Office 365 groups will show up in Outlook. Right now, they're only showing up in OWA. And then the last two are really nice enhancements in terms of securing the platform. So I talked about DLP, data loss prevention, inside of Exchange, Outlook, and then even SharePoint and OneDrive for Business. But as you're working on the document inside of the desktop client, you really didn't have much information about what was happening. Now you're going to be able to see those notifications and what policies you're actually potentially violating right inside of Excel, Word, and PowerPoint. And then last but definitely not least is multi-factor authentication. Office 365 has offered you multi-factor authentication for quite some time, and it's a great user experience when you're talking about interacting with Office 365 through the browser. When you're talking about interacting with Office 365 through the desktop client, excuse me, previous versions of Office, it was somewhat clumsy in terms of the user experience. Office didn't understand multi-factor authentication. So what you had to do is you had to create this concept of what's called an app password, and you basically were telling all of your Office products, use this password every time you're prompted for multi-factor authentication. So it's not really multi-factor authentication, but it was able to get you through and interact with the content. So now with 2016, you're going to get a true interaction with multi-factor authentication. So the big step forward. All right, so that's enough with the PowerPoint slides. Let's jump into some demos. Okay, so hopefully everybody can see my desktop. You should see my browser up with OWA. And I'm going to start off with going into OneDrive for Business. So those of you not familiar with Office 365, this big black bar across the top here is called the Suite bar. And this is basically the top level where you're going to see where you are inside of Office 365. If we go all the way to the left here, we've got what's called the App Launcher. I'm going to click on that. And I'm going to open up OneDrive for Business. You can see here are all the Office 365 applications that I have available to me in this tenant. And again, I'm going to go to OneDrive for Business. And again, this is the cloud storage for your individuals inside of the organization. So not the content that they would be storing inside of SharePoint, when they're working on teams, projects, departments, line of business. This is more their individual content that maybe they would have had on the home drive. Now they can have it inside of cloud storage so that they can have it accessible across multiple devices and access just about anywhere. We look on the left-hand side, we've got a couple links here, files. It's going to show me all my files. I can click on recent to see anything I've recently worked on. If someone else has shared content with me, I can also see that here. And if I've deleted anything, I can always recover it through the recycle bin. Across the top, I have the ability to create a new Office document right within the browser. If I didn't want to create a new one, I could also upload a document from my local system. And I have the ability to sync my content locally. So I've already clicked sync. So if we look in the bottom right here in my task tray, you can see this cloud icon here. I will actually right-click on it, and I'll open my OneDrive for Business folder. And here you can see it's really just a local folder on the file system, but the content that's in Office 365's OneDrive for Business is actually being synced locally. Any changes I were to make locally would be synced up to the cloud, and vice versa. Anything made in the cloud would be synced down locally. Okay. The last thing to notice here is we have on the right-hand side, a column called sharing. You can see if I'm the only person that can see it, there's a lock here showing that very specifically, saying only you. And if I shared it with other users, I can actually click on those names. And here we can see the actual users that I'm sharing it with. I can actually stop sharing it right away. I can notify everybody through an email. I can actually even invite other people here if I wanted to. And it's really as simple as starting to type, and it will bring back people in your organization. The next thing to note is, as I have a document selected, if I click on details, we can see over here in the right-hand side, it's using Office Web Applications where I can actually do a preview and flip through the PowerPoint slide. I can also see who I'm sharing the content with. I can actually click share, and it'll bring up that dialog again, so I can share the content with other individuals. And more interestingly is we have recent activity here, so we can see Garth created this document, he's edited it, he's now shared it with these different users. So we get good information about the document itself, not only just a folder structure here. Another thing to note here is I've got a folder called email attachments, and I'll show you in a moment. Once we start interacting with those email attachments in OWA and in Office 2016 Outlook desktop client, those would automatically be uploaded here. So with that, let's actually go back to our email, and let's create an email and use an attachment. So let's send it to Sarah, and we'll send it to Katie, and we'll just call this expenses, and let's attach a document. So what you'll notice right away is OneDrive for Business. It's right there. It's the first thing that it's going to give you in terms of an option for getting your documents. And you can see anything that I've worked on recently, or if I wanted to go across any of my files. And we could also bring back files from groups. I've already got one group created. I'll show you how to create a group and what it actually gives you if you wanted to bring back files from there. Let's start off with just bringing something from my local system. So from my computer, I'll bring in this expense Excel spreadsheet. And you'll see here I'm prompted for, do I want to do the traditional attach as copy, or would I like to use the newer upload and attach as a OneDrive file? So let's use that. And you'll see it's actually bringing it in. And something to note is that while we have our traditional Excel icon here, we also have a little cloud at the bottom left, right, telling us that this isn't actually an attachment, it's a cloud attachment. So let's send that off to Sarah and Katie. And if I go to Garth's OneDrive for Business and I click on the email attachments, you'll see that that document has actually been uploaded here. So I'm actually going to bring up another browser, and in the upper right, you can see I'm actually logged in as Sarah Davis. I'm going to click on that email that Sarah received, and I'm going to just click on the expense sheet. Here you'll notice that I haven't actually left Outlook at this point in time. I'm actually getting a rich preview of the document right inside of Outlook, and if I wanted to, I can actually edit in place and reply. So I'm going to actually click edit and reply, and let's give ourselves a little more real estate here, and we can actually hide the email. Let's scroll all the way up to the top, and I also have another window open with Katie, since Garth had sent this document to both Katie and to Sarah. And at this point, you'll notice that we've been notified Katie Jordan is now editing this document. So let me just paint the picture of what's happening here. Garth sent an email attachment, sent a document as a OneDrive attachment to Katie and Sarah. They both opened it up right within Outlook. They haven't actually left Outlook at this point in time, and they're both editing this attachment. So you can see here, Katie's icon is blue, and it's actually showing me where Katie's cursor is on the screen. So if I go back to my other screen and I change the value in there, we can see 302 is now just bumped up by 402 by Katie. And let's say if I wanted to Sarah make a change, that would have, you can see, but it's also reflected on Katie's screen. So I'm actually going to have Katie send her updates, and those will be sent off and stored. Everybody will be notified that she is actually no longer editing this document and her changes have been made. I'm going to bring back my email window and I'm going to send those updates. So Garth sent the attachment. It was a OneDrive for Business attachment. Katie and Sarah both opened the document right inside of Outlook. They never left. They edited it. They sent it. And now if we go back to Garth, we can see he's received emails that those updates have taken place, and he can open it right inside of Outlook. And you can see their updates have all been retained inside of OneDrive for Business. Okay. All right. So next, let's go back and show some of the security features inside of email. So we've sent attachments. We've interacted with attachments using OneDrive for Business. We've done co-authoring of those attachments. And the co-authoring, while I showed it to you in the context of email and OneDrive for Business, the same authoring experience would hold true if you had content inside of SharePoint. While you wouldn't get the same experience in the Outlook itself, if you did open the documents from SharePoint directly, multiple users can author that content and interact with it. So now let's start talking about the email security that we mentioned earlier. So if I wanted to create a new email, and in the upper right here, I click on these three ellipses, I have the ability to set permissions. And again, this is rights management offered to you inside of Office 365. Really don't have to do much. You can just turn it on, and you now have the ability to send confidential, view only, and do not forward email messages. So I'm not going to send one. Let's just go scroll down, and I'll show you one that I already I've received. So right here, we've got an email from Bonnie, and you'll notice that there's a different icon on the message itself. There's a circle with a red circle with a line through it. I open up that email, double click it so we can see it full screen. We have the notice here that it's confidential. It's proprietary and internal use only. If I send this email to someone else, I can modify the email, but I cannot copy or print this email. So if I come up to the ellipse here, you'll see that print is actually grayed out. I cannot print it, and you'll just have to take my word for it. I'm trying to select the text in here. I can't select it and copy it. So this email has been rights protected. You also have the ability, once you're interacting with Office 365, this same functionality of setting permissions can be put on any document as well. The other one that we mentioned in the slides was data loss prevention. So let's send and try and send an email with credit card information. This is one of the sensitive information types that Microsoft provides to you out of the box with Office 365. So right now I'm trying to send an email that has credit card information. in the background, what I've done is I've actually set up a policy that says anytime you try and send an email with credit card information, I want that email to be blocked. So I'm clicking send. It's now gone. I've tried to send it out, and you'll see I immediately get a response from Office 365 saying a custom flow rule has been hit. We're not authorized to deliver this message, and you can see it's been blocked here. It's never even made it to the recipient at this point in time. So DLP, while I showed you credit card information, this could have been HIPAA compliance, this could have been PCI. You can also do stuff where if you have specific forms in your organization, there's a concept called document fingerprinting. So if you have a form template, you want to actually block from going outside the organization. Anytime someone fills out that form, you can do it. I also have it set up where if I were to send an email with the subject and inside the subject had the word encrypt in there, the message would also be encrypted. And you can set up other rules such as if the email is going to external users and it has a certain sensitive content type inside of it, automatically encrypt it. So there's a lot you can do. You can start chaining different rules together and interacting with that content securely through data loss prevention. Okay. Now let's jump over to groups. So here on my left-hand side, you can see this section, groups. I've already got one group created called Office 365 Webinar. Let's go create a new group. Now, groups are basically, like I said before, the ability for teams to collaborate, to spin up collaboration spaces quickly and interact together. So let's do demo group. And it's Office 365 searching, and it's saying, okay, demo group is available as title. I do not want this to be public. I only want it to members that are inside of this group to have access, and subscribe new members so that they receive notifications. Basically, every action that takes place in the group, users will be notified through email, that means. So let's click create. So now in the background, this is spinning up a SharePoint site collection with a document library for you. It's spinning up a Office 365 mail group so you can interact with. It's spinning up OneNote for you, and it's setting up a group calendar for you. So let's add new people to this. Let's pick Katie, Sarah, and that's enough for now. So we click add. So at this point, we've now been brought to our new group. This is our new Office 365 group. Rather than show you an empty one, let's go over to one that I've already got content inside of it. So here, I guess one of the things to note is you can change the icon for the group. Hopefully this looks a little familiar to everyone on the webinar. But you're going to start off with the landing page with the conversations. So here are the different conversations happening inside of this group. And again, this is conversations that you don't want siloed inside of the different individuals' email boxes. This is now memorialized. It's searchable. People can now interact with this based on the permissions that they have. So here we have an ongoing discussion thread about the PowerPoint that happened to be uploaded, a link to it, and then some feedback around it. In addition to the conversations, we also have a calendar for the group. So you can see here's all the content that the group is, here's all the different meetings and check-ins that we've just defined for this group. We also have the ability to look at the different members inside the group. We can add new members if we wanted to, if we're an admin. We also have the ability to look at the files. So what's really happening in the background is each Office 365 group is being given its own SharePoint site collection in the background with a dedicated document library. And today, for those of you who are familiar with SharePoint and document libraries, this document library, you're not really creating content types or putting metadata on it. It is strictly adding new folders and adding documents to it. So here you can see the files for this group. You can also see any files that have been shared with this group specifically, or anything that's been deleted and in the recycling bin that you'd want to recover at some point in time. In addition to that, you have a OneNote notebook. So any of the team meetings where everyone's taking notes or sharing content within notebooks is now available for you to interact with too. So Office 365 groups, it is relatively new. Microsoft is pushing this further and further, but right now you have the ability to interact with conversations, calendars, files, and notebooks. So this will give you a way, while you had most of this before, when you just had to go to multiple places to do it. You'd have to go to SharePoint for certain things. You'd have to go to OneDrive for other pieces. You'd have to interact with IT to set up specific mailbox groups. And then you'd have to have them set up shared calendars. This now empowers the teams to now create this on their own and interact with that content and collaborate much faster than the overall process that they may have had to have jumped through before. Okay. Now let's jump into the About Me. I'm going to click on Garth's picture up here and click on About Me. Again, this is the kind of the evolution of your My Site. It's your landing page about you. You can see here basic content that's been entered in, your organizational structure, some contact information. If you have a blog, we have past projects, skills. We could have also had clients that we work with. So what you really end up having is really this profile that people start finding you for information that they're looking for. Instead of sending out those broadcast emails that everyone just loves, that everybody replies all to, this is the one-stop shop for really that skill search across the organization. And then we can also see in the upper right here, because we have link, we can start doing messaging, we can start calls, and we can even launch emails right from here. So the next piece we're going to jump to is Delve. So Delve gives you this, what they call boards inside of the screen. And basically, as I said before, it's all about content that is relevant to you based on content you've interacted with, content your peers have interacted with, people on your team have interacted with. And you see on the left-hand side, here's a list of people that it thinks I'm most likely to interact with based on interactions over the past few days. So this is a constantly evolving list, potentially depending on how many people you interact with in the organization. You know, if you're going to meetings with different people, or you're having different instant messages or email threads, or even just overall document updates or reviews, you'll see this list change quite frequently. And then these boards will constantly be updated with the content that's most relevant to you. I would definitely say, as a power user of Office 365, I've definitely gone through the transition of, I live with search. I still do a lot of search, but I would say day to day, I usually come to Delve first, just because I know the top 3 or 4 documents I'm working on are always going to be here. The other nice piece is, not only is it going to bring up the information that's relevant to you, you also have this concept of filters inside of the boards. So here you can see we've got, it's basically you're creating tags for the boards themselves. So here we've got a marketing campaign. So of all the all the content that's most relevant to me, there's been tags of marketing campaign. So now I could filter that and show just the relevant marketing campaign stuff that's been assigned to me. Or if I wanted to see sales performance, that's available to me. And it's pretty easy to add something to a board, even if it's a new board. You can create new boards, or you can literally just start typing and it'll find boards that are already available to you. The key thing with Delve is everything is security trimmed. So just because it's going out and finding content that someone else worked on that you have a close relationship with does not mean it's going to show up in your board. It is completely security trimmed, and only content that you have access to will be presented to you. Okay? And then the last thing I wanted to touch upon is the video portal. Again, all organizations are starting to create more and more digital content. There are many use cases where you really have videos that you want to stay internal to the organization. Office 365 Video Portal is a great place to do that. It's very easy to use. As an admin here, I have the ability to set what's called spotlight videos at the top, so everyone in the organization is going to see these videos. I scroll down, I now see videos that are trending in the organization. These are videos that the high percentage of people seem to be viewing at a certain period of time. And then underneath that, I could see the different channels that I've set up. So here's this one channel called Executive Corner. Let me click on that. Inside of this channel, I also have the ability to set up spotlight videos. And then I can also see the videos that are trending even within this channel itself. And if I wanted to, I can come in and just click on all the videos in here. So you have a nice interaction here where you can send out links to the videos. You can view them here. If I just click on any one of these videos, again, this video is actually not coming from SharePoint, OneDrive for Business, or even Office 365. This is being streamed from Azure Media Services. And the nice thing with that is, if I come down here, you can see I have different quality here in terms of what's available to me. There's also an iOS app, an Apple app for this. There's also, I forgot to mention, but an iPhone app for the Office 365 groups. Either way, with Office 365 Video Portal, you now have the ability to consume these videos from any device, and you didn't have to worry about creating all of those different renditions and encodings for you. It's done as soon as you upload it to the system. Okay. Now, that was the last part of the demo. Let me just bring back the presentation. And with that, I'm going to open it up to questions and start answering any questions that we see. I see a handful of them that have come in. We've got one: when should I store documents in SharePoint versus OneDrive for Business? So I kind of touched upon it a little bit. OneDrive for Business is very much about the enterprise-grade storage for your individual users. As soon as a document becomes something that is relevant to a team, a department, a project, it's probably something that belongs inside of a SharePoint team site, or even potentially a Office 365 group once you get more comfortable with that concept. That's really, from a technical perspective, either one of them will do. It will become more of a process and a governance conversation for your organization. But again, when you start talking about beyond the individual, you start looking at really putting the content inside of SharePoint and not OneDrive for Business. The next one we have here is, when would I want to have conversations in Yammer versus groups? So groups is very much integrated into the Office 365 experience. And that's very much what Microsoft is starting to build upon and continuing to push forward. Yammer, however, is still being integrated into Office 365. The big difference between the two is Yammer, you can have those discussions. You can also add external people to those discussions. So if you have third parties you're interacting with, whether they're vendors or clients, you can start having some of those discussions inside of Yammer. Whereas groups is very much, it's tied to users of Office 365. It's not open to discussions out to individuals outside of your Office 365 tenant. The other big factor around which one to use is anything inside of groups is really considered part of Office 365 and is part of your e-discovery process. Yammer would not be open to your e-discovery process right now. That may change in the near future, but right now groups would give you that. Conversations in groups would give you that e-discovery process, but Yammer conversations would not. The last one here, I guess someone used to upload video to SharePoint, and they're asking, why would I use the new video portal instead of uploading it to a SharePoint video to an asset library? The big thing is really around when you upload videos into SharePoint, it doesn't really scale very well. It's really there, and it's got to be downloaded to everyone's individual machine. So if you have an on-premise SharePoint, you're really hurting the performance of SharePoint. If it's online, you're really getting a download experience. There's no streaming capabilities, whereas where Office 365 Video Portal, because it's using Azure streaming services, you are getting streaming video as opposed to a complete download. The other huge advantage is at the Office 365 video portal gives you the ability to play it back on any device. Whereas if you're uploading something to a SharePoint asset library, or even simpler, a document library, if you haven't done the encoding for each one of those devices, the users are not going to be able to see that content. Okay. So we've got another question here asking, looks like the transition to Office 365 should be made enterprise-wide level. Is that correct? So yes and no. When we're talking about working with the different components of it, there's definitely a rollout schedule you want to look at, depending on the size of your organization. I mean, a small organization, it's relatively easy to move people up onto Office 365. When you're talking about mail, you're really going to migrate your content over in stages and do Delta migrations. Same thing with getting your content into SharePoint Online or OneDrive for Business. You're going to use third-party tools, really, and start doing Delta migrations. And as people start interacting with it, you can actually start turning on give access to different users to different parts of it. But to truly get the experience of collaboration across the organization, it's not until they all end up on Office 365 that you would get that true end-to-end experience. So the answer is sort of yes, but in stages, I would say.